I'm going to start off with the same way I've asked everybody. Can you tell us what made you decide to go into law and become an attorney, and tell us about your law school experience?
Okay. I was not one of those folks who decided from an early age that a lawyer is what I wanted to be. I graduated from college in 1968, and my choices were essentially join some branch of the military service or continue my education. And I took the LSATs and had a decent score, so I figured, well, another 3 years of law school would give me some more time to grow up. So that's how I decided to go to law school. And I went to law school at the University of North Carolina. I had gone to undergraduate school in upstate New York. So when I came to law school here, I didn't know a soul. And after having spent 4 years in upstate New York, I'll never forget my first class was a torts class. And in the torts class, the professor kept talking about a car that had damage to it because of the manner in which oil was put in the car. And I kept thinking, why would anybody put a detergent in a vehicle? That just made no sense to me. So it was halfway through the class before I figured, oh, all is oil. So not only did I have to transition to law school, I had to learn a new language too. But fortunately, I was able to do that. And the best thing that happened in law school was that I got married right in the middle of my law school career in the midpoint of my second year. And Leslie's still my wife. We're still together. So that's the best thing that happened in law school.
Was she also a law student?
She was not, but she's someone I'd known all my life. I'm originally from Charleston, West Virginia, as is her family. So when we were even little kids, her brother is 4 days older than I am, and my sister is 6 months older than she is. So from a very early stage, we played together, and we actually became reunited at my sister's wedding and got married shortly after that.
And so she came down Chapel Hill with you, obviously, to finish law school. So take us on your career path from there. So you finished law school,
and I was very fortunate to be employed at the Attorney General's office. So that was really my first position was with the Attorney General's office. Robert Morgan was the Attorney General at the time.
And where was that?
Here in Raleigh.
In Wake County. So your whole career has been here?
My whole career has been here. The day I graduated from law school, we moved to Wake County, and I've been here ever since.
So talk to us about the changes that you've seen to Wake County, to Raleigh, to the legal landscape, to the profession in those years in our area.
Obviously, there have been a lot of changes in my over 50 years since I came to Raleigh in 1971. At that time, everybody was downtown. Virtually all the law offices were downtown. This was before the Fayetteville Street Mall. There was just Fayetteville Street. And the new courthouse had just opened. I think it was built in 1968. And so it was a real convivial, relatively small community type practice, especially compared to today. And of course, over the course of time, what I've seen is the practice has spread out. Wake County has grown incrementally, and lawyers are now practicing in very different places in very different areas.
So, and then take us through your career, like the different jobs that you had.
Okay. I started in the Attorney General's office. It was a very interesting experience from the beginning. I was assigned to the antitrust section. There were 2 lawyers in the antitrust section, and my boss was a former Marine who had joined the Corps at the age of 17 and put himself through college and law school. And he was a real bulldog. And when I joined the office, the antitrust section was involved in a class action lawsuit against pharmaceutical manufacturers over price fixing of broad spectrum antibiotics. So I walked into this virtual hornet's nest of a huge nationwide class action. In fact, almost all the states had settled the cases against the drug manufacturers, with North Carolina being one of the holdouts, thanks to my boss, the Bulldog. And early on in my, I hadn't been licensed for a year even, and there was a big settlement conference in Attorney General Morgan's office. Robert Morgan was the Attorney General. And here I was just really a nobody and nothing. And there were just terrific lawyers from all over the country that came to talk about settling this case. The Pfizer was represented by a law firm out of Los Angeles called Gibson, Dunn and Crutcher, and its lead counsel was Julian von Kalinowski, who had written the antitrust treatise used in most law schools. And then one of the companies was American Cyanamide, and it was represented by a couple of lawyers from the Donovan Leisure firm on Wall Street, and they were terrific lawyers. And then there was another Wall Street lawyer from Cravath, Swaine and Moore who represented Squibb at the time. And there were two minor defendants, Upjohn and Bristol Myers, who were represented by an attorney, a law firm in Washington, D.C., Covington and Burling. And these were just the most prominent lawyers in the country, the most prominent firms in the country. And here's little John Silverstein in this office listening to all these people have this settlement negotiation. So it was a wonderful experience for me. And the defendants selected this. First, let me mention the case had been resolved in the Federal Trade Commission. The Federal Trade Commission had found that these 5 pharmaceutical companies had engaged in price fixing. So the state's action was really to determine how much they would get. And North Carolina's share turned out to be around $2 million. And so the attorneys for the defendants were making the case for settling for that amount, while my boss felt that that was really not a sufficient amount. So the defendants selected one of the attorneys from Wall Street to represent them in their settlement discussions with Attorney General Morgan. And it was interesting because the gentleman who made the presentation was just a wonderful man, but he was a wounded World War II vet. And I think they picked him on purpose because Attorney General Morgan was himself in the Air Force Reserves and was partial toward attorneys with military experience. We had several on the office staff at the time. And so this attorney made his presentation. And, what I remember so much about it is after he made the presentation, Attorney General Morgan pretty much said, what you say is true. And I know it's a fair settlement, and I know other states have accepted it on this basis. But, I've assigned this case to the attorney on my staff in whom I have a great deal of confidence. He knows a lot more about this case than I do, and he recommends that we proceed. And I'm going to back him up. I'm going to accept his recommendation, and we're going to go forward with the case. And that was, that's something that really oppressed a very young attorney at the time. And it was reinforced about a year later when I was still in the antitrust division, and we had the first gas crisis, an oil embargo. This is in the early 1970s. And people couldn't, oil jobbers couldn't get gas stations couldn't get gas. There were lines a mile long. People were getting price gouged. And the calls to the Attorney General's office were coming to me. And at that time, we had rotary phones, and the phones had lights on the bottom. And so when a call was waiting, it would light up. Well, there were 5 buttons on my phone, and they looked like a Christmas tree, just flashing all the time, from oil jobbers, citizens who couldn't get gas, even to elected officials, including the governor, trying to find out, what are we going to do about this? How are we going to get this resolved? And what I remember most about it is I talked with Attorney General Morgan about it. And the one thing that we could address was price gouging. And so that's what we address. And he said to me, he said, do the best you can with these calls. I'll take care of the elected officials, and, we'll get through this. And again, I was just so impressed to have an attorney general who, as long as you did what he asked you to do, he had your back. And that really made a huge impression on me as a young attorney.
So it sounds like he was a mentor to you. Can you tell us about the importance of having a mentor as you're starting out?
Well, he really was. He really wasn't a mentor. But he had a leadership style that I admired. He required, at the time we would complain about these things, but he required all the attorneys on the staff. At that time, we used dictaphones. And he required all the attorneys to present him with a tape on a weekly basis as to what we were doing that week, so that as he traveled from place to place, he listened to those tapes so he could keep up with what was going on in his office. And I thought that was a very admirable quality as well. And we used to be able to fit in the highway conference of the Department of Transportation, and he used to have regular staff conferences where he would go around the table and ask attorneys to talk about the cases they were working on. And I think it was that type of collaborative approach that really made a great impression on me.
And those types of things that you learned as a young lawyer from someone who was a mentor, did you carry that on in your career to share with mentees when you became the mentor?
I don't know, Amy. Let me answer it this way, because I've thought about that some, because recently an attorney that I worked with at the Attorney General's office a long time ago, in discussing our work together, this is over 45 years ago, said that I had been like a mentor to him, and I had never thought of it in that regard. But I think that perhaps there were some learning experiences in that office based on my position and the fact there were so many people over me, that I was able to see their styles and hopefully to learn from them. And I'll give you the final example from the Attorney General's office. And this was a wonderful experience that I had. At that time, this was toward the end of my career. Robert Morgan had been elected to the United States Senate, and Rufus Edmiston had been elected Attorney General. And so I was still in antitrust, but I was about to leave the office and go into private practice. And one day I got called into Attorney General Edmiston's office to discuss a criminal appeal. Now, at that time, all the attorneys on the staff handled criminal appeals in the Court of Appeals and the Supreme Court on a rotating basis. And it was a great experience because you had to prepare the brief and argue the case. So that's good experience for any attorney. But it was unusual to be called to the Attorney General's office to discuss one, because it was handled on a staff level, not on the Attorney General level. And this case was a murder for hire case. But what made it interesting was that the attorney on the other side, representing the defendant, was recently retired Senator Sam Ervin Jr., who had risen to fame because of the Watergate hearings. And during those Watergate hearings, they were really televised nationally, one of the first national televised congressional hearings, and featured prominently in a lot of those TV bits were his chief counsel over his shoulder, Rufus Edmiston. So that was a pretty heady experience by this time I'd been licensed for 5 years. So before I'd been licensed less than a year when I was with all the Wall Street journals. Now I was a big veteran of 5 years, so hopefully I thought I could handle this one. So I started to prepare the brief, and I found that in my research that the issue in the case had to do with whether or not you could introduce evidence of the commission of similar crimes in a subsequent case involving a totally different set of circumstances. And that case had actually been presented to the North Carolina Supreme Court in a case called State v. McCain. And the opinion in that case was written by then Associate Justice Sam Ervin Jr. So we were going back into the North Carolina Supreme Court, and the case we were discussing most was a case he had written the opinion in. So it was obviously a very interesting experience. But what I really learned most from it was, we made our argument. I mean, the courtroom was incredible. The Supreme Court courtroom, same one used today, it was 3 deep with reporters and photographers. This is before the 24/7 news cycle. So all the reporters from different media and different newspapers, and all the photographers with their cameras and their bulbs flashing were gathered around the courtroom to see the argument. And so afterwards, we exited the courtroom, and my wife had come to watch the argument with me. I think probably the real reason was to see Senator Ervin, just like everybody else who was there. But we walked out. I remember we went to the right, and Senator Ervin walked out and went to the left. And everybody in the courtroom went to the left. So it was a instant, wonderful lesson in humility. Nobody was interested in me. I was just a bit player in Senator Ervin returning to court. And that I was involved just didn't really matter at all. So I stood there with my wife and watched all these people at the other end of the corridor and thought, this really tells you something. You haven't done anything. He's the one that's done everything, not you. And that was emphasized the next day. My office was right next to the Department of Justice on Fayetteville Street. This was before there was a mall. This was just Fayetteville Street. So I walked across Fayetteville Street to the Olivia Rainey Library. And the Olivia Rainey Library got newspapers from all over the state. And of course, the local paper, the News Observer, had a big article and a picture of Senator Sam. And the last paragraph mentioned me, had my name in it. So I said, well, let me see what some of these other papers say. So I get to the Greensboro paper. There's a big article about Senator Sam returning to court. And the last sentence is, Special Deputy Attorney General John Silverstein argued the case for the state. So I had one sentence in the Greensboro paper. Well, that's okay. So I looked at the Charlotte paper, big article about Senator Sam. I wasn't even in it. So my sphere of influence went barely to the triad. Didn't really get much out of my own house. And again, it's just a great lesson in humility that I hope stood me in good stead over the years. But the one good thing that came out, well, there's more than one good thing, but what was good about the experience obviously was having the opportunity. Here I am, almost 50 years later, talking about being able to argue a case in the North Carolina Supreme Court against Sam Ervin Jr. I mean, that's just something that has stuck with me the whole time. And then the lesson in humility that I learned, I think, was very important. And then the third thing was that the article was picked up nationally. The wire services picked up because he had retired from the Senate, and here he was, the Watergate hero returning to court. And it actually even made my hometown newspaper in Charleston, West Virginia. And the version that came was the same one in Greensboro. It just had the line that said, Special Deputy Attorney General argued the case for the state. Well, my mother saw that. And she got so much mileage out of just that one little sentence, that the fact that, I argued a case against Senator Sam Ervin in the North Carolina Supreme Court. I had a wonderful lesson in humility because at the time I had done absolutely nothing in my legal career, and I made my mother proud. So it was a great resolution.
That's a great story. So that experience and all those years in the Attorney General's office, that led you next into private practice?
I formed a practice with Howard Satisky in 1976, and the firm of the world headquarters of Satisky and Silverstein is still in Raleigh. His son Keith joined us, probably about 30 years ago now, and then David Gadd more recently. And so I've had the benefit of practice. I'm retired now, but I had the benefit of practicing with those great lawyers during my career.
And tell us about when you were in private practice. Tell us about the importance of that attorney-client relationship and how you carry that in your career.
I think that what I learned, particularly in the Attorney General's office, I was able to I met some really good attorneys. I got to handle some important cases, and it was a wonderful experience for me. And I remember that when I left to go into private practice with Howard, I asked some of the local attorneys in Raleigh that I'd become friendly with for advice as to how I should handle private practice. I remember Charlie Blanchard told me that you've got to maintain an even keel. There are going to be peaks and there are going to be valleys. And you've got to make sure you never let yourself get too high or too low. Because if you get too high, you're going to come crashing down. And if you get too low, you're going to have a hard time climbing back up. But if you can just try to maintain that even keel and handle the highs and lows, you really do a better service for your clients. And that's what I found in my practice. I found that once I could get in that conference room, and whether it was a residential real estate closing, or whether it was to discuss wills, or whether it was something more serious to the client that could affect them personally, I found that in that room, so long as I maintained that even keel, and really tried to listen to what they had to say and tried to keep them on an even keel, that's what stood me the best in my practice.
So the legal profession lends itself to stress, and many attorneys, it can wear on them through the years. How did you deal with that and life and work and all of that together? How did you deal with that through the years?
I think the way to deal with it is really the same as the advice I would give young attorneys, and that's to get involved in community activities and bar activities. Because in those circumstances, you will be given opportunities to work with other people toward common goals. Not to be litigating against someone, or not be trying to win something, but to try to achieve a common goal for the good of either the community or for the legal profession. And I really did find that working with terrific lawyers toward objectives that would benefit our communities and our profession was really not only rewarding, but it had a tendency to put the rest of it in perspective and to, I think, enable me to handle the legal situations even a little bit better. Because what happens when you work with community organizations and with other attorneys, especially if you get engaged and involved, you learn how to read people. And that's a very important aspect of the practice of law. You've got to be able to read people. And I think the more that you engage with others and work toward things that you're commonly interested in, the more opportunities you have to read how people work together and to read how they accomplish things.
So you mentioned coming together for a common goal. During your time with the Bar Association, when you were president, when what is an achievement in that area that you're most proud of?
I think that just the fact of getting there. I came to North Carolina not knowing a soul, and went through law school and came to Raleigh really only knowing my law school classmates. And I know that being elected as onto the board of the Wake County Bar Association, then president of the Wake County Bar, and being elected as a bar counselor, it just meant a great deal to me. And then there are people like John McMillan, who I know. He was an officer of the state bar when I was elected to the council, and I know he looked after me, and I know that he gave me opportunities to develop skills that enabled me to succeed in that type of leadership of the state bar. And again, what I got to do there was to not just interact with lawyers and people in my community, but lawyers all over the state, the region, and the country, really. And it was really, I think, the highlight of my legal profession to be able to say that I was able to work with some pretty outstanding people over the course of my legal career.
And all that was thanks to Bar Association and a lot of, right? Like,
it really was. I think that's why I would encourage any young attorney to be involved. It doesn't have to be the Bar Association or the state bar. There are organizations for gender-related, trial-related, defense-related. It's not specifically the organization itself. It's the involvement and the engagement that's important because, again, I think it helps you establish relationships with people. It helps you understand people. And I think ultimately it helps you succeed.
And all these changes that you've seen in the legal profession and through the years, where do you see the future of the legal profession in Wake County? What's next?
Well, yeah, that's a tough question, Amy. Because in thinking about that, when I started, we dictated, and I remember the first fax machine. Howard and I used to go to a title insurance company to use their fax machine. We thought it was just wonderful. And now, we see that given the style of paper and the print that was used, everything's disappeared. So all faxes are just gone. And copiers were wonderful, and word processors were wonderful, and seeing technology come was wonderful. But again, I think it really boils down to relationships. I was just so fortunate to have practiced with Howard and Keith and David over the course of my career. And I think that, young attorneys, you've got to be in a situation that is good for you and good for your family and enables you to put family goals and life experiences in perspective along with your legal practice. It's not just being a lawyer. I think being a lawyer is being a part of your community and a part of your profession. And I think that the more you understand that, the better you will be at all three.
And then you answered my next question, the advice for new attorneys. That's really great advice. When you see, and you mentioned that you had daughters as well, when you see the class graduating from law school at UNC now, and what year did you graduate from UNC Law? 71. So now you see the class of 2021, 2024. What goes through your heart when you see them?
It's a much more diverse class than mine was. I mean, I was a real outsider in my class. And I don't think there's many outsiders today as there were then. They're different from different backgrounds and different perspectives. And I learned early on in my career that the more diverse viewpoints you can bring to the table, the better decisions that are made. And so I think that if the law schools are turning out people with more diverse backgrounds, I think it benefits society.